And that's the secret to investing in real estate. How is it that a 25-year-old kid moves to a brand new city and without any help from his parents, builds a $9.5 million real estate portfolio in under 3 years? And on top of that, earns $515,000 a year annually in income. In, by the way, the third most expensive real estate market in North America. Yes, a real estate market that makes Vancouver and Toronto look cheap. Well, that's exactly what Sahil Mehta did. Now, most people would assume that building a $9.5 million real estate portfolio would take years to do, especially in one of the most expensive real estate markets in North America. But what Sahil proves is that becoming a homeowner is possible, no matter what market you are in, and that not only can you become a homeowner, but with a little bit of sacrifice and a little bit of ingenuity, you can actually become a real estate millionaire. Now, in the last couple of years, I've seen a lot of people lose hope in the real estate dream, as home prices have risen significantly, along with the cost of pretty much everything else. And while Sahil's situation is unique, there are some lessons that all of us can garner from his experience. And I've broken down exactly how he was able to build his portfolio and extrapolated the exact lessons that you can learn from him, this 25-year-old kid who found a way to buy in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the US. And if he can do it, the truth is, so can you. But the difference between those who do, the Oprahs, Elon Musk, and the Richard Bransons, the best of the best in the world, and the rest of us, is simply deciding to be successful. And clearly, Sahil is the embodiment of that, because clearly at a young age, he saw the pain that his parents went through in the 2000 bursting of the dot-com bubble and the 2008 financial crisis, and he decided that he was going to be different and build an incredible real estate portfolio that, if he just doesn't screw it up, will serve him for the rest of his life. But before I get into the details, my name is Nolan Matthias, and if you want to thrive financially, this is the place for you. So do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and hit the like button so you don't miss a video, and also so that more people like you can see this video. Okay, so this story absolutely boggles my mind. As I was doing research for another YouTube video that I'm about to create, I found this article on Business Insider about this young guy and his brother who built a $9.5 million real estate portfolio. And I'm not gonna lie, I spent about 5 hours going down a rabbit hole trying to figure out how a guy who's 15 years younger than me built a $9.5 million real estate portfolio in, like I said in the intro, one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world. This is absolutely incredible. And as I dug deeper and deeper into the story, it got more and more interesting. Especially for a finance and real estate nerd like me, I just couldn't walk away from this story and not make a video on it. And what I did is I broke down Sahil's story into 6 parts. So in other words, 6 key things that he did in order to build a portfolio really, really quickly. And while he may have been at a different stage of his life, the lessons that we can learn from him are significant no matter what stage of life we find ourselves at right now. Because if a 25-year-old kid can find a way to buy 5 properties and 13 total rental doors, then I don't think any of us have an excuse for not being able to buy at least one. So Sahil's story starts first and foremost by doing something that I talk about quite a bit on this channel, and that's creating a scalable income. Now, obviously he had some ambition and some drive, but he started right out of the gate by recognizing that in order to succeed, and in order to make sure that he doesn't find himself in the exact same position as his parents, who lost a lot of his money in the 2008 financial crisis, well, he needed to make sure that he earned enough income in order to purchase assets that eventually replaced his income. And I'm going to tell you right now, for a 25-year-old kid, his income was not insignificant. In fact, he took the initiative to get his real estate license at the age of 18 and subsequently became the executive assistant for a really well-known realtor in the San Francisco Bay Area. And that was the first key to his success. He entered into an industry and a job where his income was scalable, and then he found the right people to associate with. And I'll get to a little bit more about his mentor and his employer in a second here. Because even though none of the articles that I found mentioned this person individually, I did eventually track down who he was working with, and I'm going to tell you that right now, who he was working with played a significant role in his success. Not because he was handed anything, but because he associated himself with really amazing people, and by doing so, it gave him no choice but to rise to their level. Because as Tony Robbins says, you're the average of the 5 people that you associate with the most, and I'm going to tell you right now, Sahil associated with some pretty impressive people. And because of who he was associated with, he was able to earn a significant amount of income, totaling up to $515,000 in 2021. Now, in addition to recognizing the fact that he needed to have a scalable income, he also recognized the fact that he couldn't do it alone. He needed to have great partners. and he had two significant partners. The first was his real estate mentor, and the second was his brother. Now, I'm going to get to his real estate mentor in a second, but let's start with his brother. Because from what I can gather of Sahil's story, is he lived outside of California. His brother, on the other hand, was living in Berkeley, California as a college student. And Sahil, before he even turned 18 years old, realized that he wanted to relocate to California so that he could go to Berkeley and go to the same university that his brother went to. Now, that meant moving to another state before he even turned 18 years of age. It also meant leaving his parents, and that caused him to have to grow up really, really quickly, which probably played a significant role in his future success, because having to become independent at a young age meant that he had to figure things out for himself. And ultimately, that meant that he ended up partnering with his brother on his very first real estate purchase in 2017 or 2019. It's hard to tell exactly when he bought his first property because there are two significant articles on him, one from Business Insider and one from MSNBC. The Business Insider article mentions that they verified every single dollar that he has earned and the value of his portfolio, so I tend to lean towards them as the more reliable source. But full disclosure here, there is a 2-year gap which we can't really account for. And that 2-year gap is the difference between whether or not he bought his first property at the age of 20 or the age of 22. Now, that either means that he built his portfolio in a matter of 3 years or 5 years. But I don't think that's relevant here because at the end of the day, whether he built it in 3 years or whether he built it in 5 years, it's still a significant portfolio in a significant market in a very short period of time. And it's clear here that he and his brother split the onus of saving for the down payments to buy each of their 5 properties. And that's where our second major lesson from Sahil comes into play, is partnerships can play a significant role in purchasing a property. And we've seen that in some of the more expensive real estate markets in both Canada and the US, where millennials and Gen Xers have partnered in reality with people like their parents and their grandparents in order to purchase properties in more expensive real estate markets. And Sahil is no different. On the first property that they purchased, they saved up a $200,000 down payment split between the two brothers, meaning that both of them had to save $100,000 each, which is not an insignificant amount of money, but an amount that probably would have taken each of them individually significantly longer to save had they tried to do it alone. So having partners in real estate, whether it be a family member or a non-family member, can help you get into the market faster and more efficiently than if you were to try to do it alone. Now, in addition to his brother, Sahil had another significant partner. And this partner was less of a partner and more of a mentor, but he was very significant. This is a person who is legendary and somebody who I was aware of before I even found the information on Sahil. So when I found out that these two individuals were connected, it made a ton of sense. So without further ado, I need to introduce you to Herman Chan. Herman is one of the most successful real estate agents in the San Francisco Bay Area, if not in North America. And in 2019, and I believe in 2020, he was the #1 real estate agent with Sotheby's in the Bay Area. Sotheby's, of course, being the most prestigious luxury real estate company in the world. So once the dots were connected here and I realized that Herman and Sahil were connected, well, it started to make a ton of sense that Sahil had a pretty big leg up when it came to real estate. But having relationships with people like the #1 realtor in the Bay Area don't happen by chance. They happen because people make a decision to succeed and they start to seek out the people that can help them do that. And that's what Sahil did in this case. As a young realtor, he made the decision to seek out this high profile realtor, and that high profile realtor saw a lot of potential in this young individual and eventually hired him to become his executive assistant. Now, that was one of the things that originally threw me off. I wasn't familiar with the term executive assistant in the real estate industry. I mean, I have an executive assistant, my wife has an executive assistant, a lot of people have them, but executive assistants typically mean these are the type of people who go about organizing days and booking flights, and Sahil was making far too much money. No, he had to be doing significantly more than that. And what I came to realize is that Sahil's actual position was likely that of what we call a buyer's agent. So, in other words, he was probably taking people out and showing them houses, helping them find their dream home so that Herman could come back and write the offer and negotiate the contract. Because anything outside of that and Sahil's income at $350,000 a year, which was a commission income, doesn't make any sense. So Sahil was likely working as Herman's buyer's agent. And to put this in perspective, Herman sells typically between $60 million and $80 million in real estate per year, which means he probably earns somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.2 to $1.8 million US. So for Sahil to be taking a $350,000 income off of that makes a ton of sense. Now, one thing I noted from these articles is that Sahil was saving up to 99% of his income. And that leads us to our third lesson that we can learn from him, which is the short-term sacrifice lesson. And it's clear that Sahil made a lot of sacrifices. Everything from moving into the first property that they bought and living in it while it was being renovated, to actually being the Airbnb manager and going through on a daily basis and changing things like the toilet paper, cleaning the house, and making sure that it was set up for the next short-term tenants. And yes, there's a short-term tenant aspect to this story, which I'll get to in a second. But what's clear here is that Sahil made a lot of sacrifices, often moving from building to building as they acquired new ones, and living in units that had either Airbnb or college tenants. In fact, it seems as though that he lived out of a suitcase for almost 3 years as he moved from unit to unit, basically taking up space that was not occupied. And that allowed him to have very little living expenses as the tenants of their respective properties ended up subsidizing his ability to live without having to pay rent or a mortgage payment. And he just seems to have this work ethic that is uncommon in people of his age. And that work ethic led him to not only make sacrifices, but to also be creative in his ability to find properties and finance them. And this is the fourth lesson that we learned from Sahil, and that's around creative financing. Because while the first property that him and his brother bought was bought using conventional financing, obviously at the age of 25 and whatever age his brother was, which doesn't appear to be significantly older than Sahil, it's very hard to get financing. So after they had acquired their first property, they moved on to their second property where they had to be more creative. And on that second property, they found a seller who had inherited the property with very little debt. And while they were in the process of selling it, wasn't necessarily married to the idea of having to offload the property completely. And as a result, Sahil and his brother were able to work with the seller's agent in order to negotiate a contract for seller financing. So this is where the seller was essentially financing the property for the buyer at an interest rate of, believe it or not, 2.2%, which was an incredibly good deal. Now, obviously, Sahil and his brother went to the seller and said, "We have a vision for this property." And that vision included making it better so that they could earn an income from it. And with a little bit of buy-in from that seller, they were able to put down a pretty modest down payment and acquire the property so that they could make the improvements and eventually rent it out in the future. And I'll get to exactly what they did with that second property in a second here. But before I get into that, I want to talk about the third property that they bought. Because after they used seller financing, they moved on to the third property, which again was a property that they weren't going to be able to acquire using conventional financing. So they moved to what's called a hard money lender. What a hard money lender is somebody who lends based on the equity in the property, knowing that if you screw up and you don't make your payment, they'll be able to take the property over and be able to sell it and get their money back. Now, these hard money loans typically come at a higher interest rate, but if you have a plan for the property and you're able to improve upon it and ultimately refinance for conventional financing, these hard money loans typically make a lot of sense. And what Sahil and his brother were able to do is they were able to prove that they had a higher income in the following year, and subsequently they were able to refinance that third property into a more conventional loan. So in a matter of just a couple of years, they had bought a property conventionally, they'd used seller financing for a property, and they had used a hard money loan. And in the case of their seller financing and their hard money loan, they were able to eventually refinance those into conventional loans at really good rates, probably on 15 or 30-year mortgages. And I'm going to lean probably towards 30-year mortgages, not 15, but I could be wrong on this. That is just a guess. But I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the section at the end based on the long game. And believe me, the game that they're playing here, if they don't screw it up, is the long game. Now, Sahil and his brother seemed to enter the market thinking that they were basically going to do fix and flips. So in other words, find a property, fix it up, and sell it for a profit. And that ended up not being how it went, at least from what I can tell. In fact, from what I can tell, almost every property they bought didn't go as planned. And it seemed like the strategy changed almost every single time. For example, on their first property, they bought a duplex that they planned to redevelop into a single family home. So in other words, 2 units into one. But they found out that the city that they were in, well, that wasn't okay from a zoning perspective. And as a result, they ended up having to rent it out as an Airbnb. And it seems after a year of living in Airbnb hell, because for the most part, from what I can tell about Airbnbs, which I'll get to in another video a week or two down the road here, so make sure you click that notification bell, is that Airbnbs can be a living hell. And that seemed to be the case for these two brothers, who after a year rented out the property to a single individual. And while it was earning significantly less money from that single individual, well, it seems to have gotten rid of a lot of the headaches that they were experiencing from the short term rentals. Now, in case I've lost you here for a second, the fifth lesson that we can learn from Sahil is to test and adjust. And that's what they've done frequently on all of their properties. Because just like their first property, which they expected to be a fix and flip, their second property, which they also expected to be a fix and flip, didn't end up turning into a rental for an individual. It ended up being a property that they rented out room by room to college students. And this can be quite lucrative, especially in a college town that doesn't have a significant amount of large buildings built around the university. Because when you have a bunch of college students and you can charge them a premium for having a room in a shared space, well, that's a really easy way to rent out a property for above what it would typically rent for. So their second property ended up earning them a pretty significant amount of income because of the way in which they decided to rent it out. Now, their third property, which was their first hard money loan property, well, that one was interesting as well. Because from what I can tell, that property was bought with the expectation that they were going to be able to take that property and make it significantly better from a rental perspective. Now, if this is the property that I'm thinking it is from the research that I did on these guys, this property was bought and significantly improved. They added a second carriage home to the property and added a story to the original home, which allowed them to rent out that property for significantly more, given that they were able to add multiple units. And because they were able to increase the value significantly to the tune of about $1.5 million, they were able to easily get a conventional loan from a conventional bank. And it appears as if they continued on with the hard money lending on their fourth and fifth properties. Now, their fifth property, it was mentioned in one of the articles that I found that they were in the process of getting commercial financing. So, what that tells me is that that was a multifamily property. And my guess is based on the fact that property number 3 had 3 units and the other properties appeared to have 1 and 2 units, it appears the property number 5 was an 8-unit building. And this was important because after you get to about 3 or 4 properties, getting more single family home financing becomes very, very difficult. So they likely knew that once they got to property number 5, that their conventional financing run was over and that they'd need to shift to commercial properties. And that's where the multifamily buy came in. Because at this point, when you start buying multifamily buildings, they start to look more at the economics of the building than they do at the individual borrower. And because these guys had proven themselves on 4 previous properties and could show a significant amount of income from their real estate endeavors, they were on the right track to be able to get that commercial financing. So now the pressure was off them to show more and more income to be able to qualify personally. And now it was all about building a business case for the building that they had and their other assets. And for real estate investors, that's really where the snowball effect starts to kick in. Because once you're able to start purchasing properties based on the merits of the property and not necessarily on the merits of your personal income, well, that's where you're able to expand your real estate portfolio quite rapidly. And while I haven't been able to find any information on these guys for the last 18 months, my expectation is that they've probably bought significantly more property and their $9.5 million portfolio could be worth as much as $50 or $100 million by now. And that's largely because they've proven that they can manage these properties and therefore the amount of financing that is probably available to them has gone up significantly. Now, last but not least, I want to talk about the long game because Sahil and his brother clearly entered the real estate game thinking it was a short-term game. And we can clearly tell from their history that they quickly realized that it wasn't because those fix and flips turned to Airbnbs and then turned into long-term rentals. And that's a huge lesson that we can learn from these two brothers. Is like anything in life, there's no such thing as a get-rich-quick scheme. And when real estate investors start to realize that real estate can be a really safe long-term game with significant returns as a result of being patient, that's when they tend to build big portfolios. And as somebody who's been doing real estate financing for the last 20 years, I can tell you that I haven't seen a lot of people who have made a lot of money in a very, very short period of time. But I can also tell you, I've seen a lot of people get really, really wealthy by simply buying properties and waiting over the long term for those properties to get significantly more valuable. And here's the thing about Sahil and his brother. Let's assume that they haven't bought any more properties and that they are done right now. Well, between the two of them, they have about $4.75 million each. Now, granted, those properties probably have a pretty significant amount of debt on them. But if they simply wait it out for the next 15 to 30 years, so for Sahil, by the time he's 55 years old, well, those properties will generate more than enough income for them to live at a greater lifestyle than they are living at right now for the rest of their life. Because let's just assume that each of them have $4.5 million worth of property today, and that $4.5 million invested would earn them about $300,000 annually. Well, $300,000 annually would give them a pretty good quality of life, especially considering that they've made so many sacrifices up until now. So the long-term game for these guys, as long as, like I said, they don't screw it up, is to hold these properties for the next 15 to 30 years, allow them to be paid off as quickly as possible. And then if they want to buy some more as cash flows increase and as their equity increases, amazing, fine. But as of right now, all they have to do is hold on for the ride for the next 15 to 30 years and they're set. And that is the value of building a great real estate portfolio. You buy enough properties to replace your income, and then you let those properties pay themselves off. And once they've paid themselves off so that they are free and clear, well, then you get to wake up every morning. And like my mentor, Larry Kendall, said, yes, I also have a mentor like Sahil had. You can wake up and do whatever you want in the morning, whenever you want. And that's the secret to investing in real estate. So if you want to know more about investing in real estate, make sure you check out this video here and make sure you hit that notification bell and the subscribe button, because I've got more really great information coming on Airbnbs and a really cool property that another guy who's significantly younger than me built out and is making a fortune from.